Back on Closer Look on this Wednesday, the 25th day of March. A little hoarse today.
Are you?
I am losing my voice. Want to know a funny story?
Yeah, sure.
So, what else you got?
I'm ready for a laugh.
So years ago when I worked in radio, religiously once a year, for whatever reason, I would lose my voice. Just wake up in the morning, voice is gone.
Same time of year?
No, various times. I'd feel great. You know, no running nose, no flu or cold. My voice would just be gone. I would always get a note from my doctor, who was a family friend, to give to my program director. And the doctor would always write on the note, please excuse Scott from work. He needs lots of fresh air and exercise walking, i.e. golf. I used to golf with my boss, and it would upset him that I'd get a free pass for a week.
Was it like a 6-week letter or for a couple
No, it
days?
was just for a week.
A whole week?
But he would literally write on there, Scott needs to play some golf. And
So
get
you
some
just
fresh
didn't go
air.
on the air for a week?
Couldn't. I had no voice. But you know what I could do? Swing a golf club.
I don't want to say that joke about face for radio, but it
You
might apply here.
You were not the first to utter those words, let me tell you.
Did you read any gambling ads? They didn't have those back then. Huh?
Touche.
You know, we ran a poll on that post.
I
yesterday.
wanted to ask you, what were the results?
Last I checked, 88%, hundreds of people cast a vote. The question was, should we ban gambling ads from the airwaves?
Wow.
And it's overwhelmingly 90%. 88 to 90% last I checked. It's interesting, too, some of the comments are a lot of people agree, and a lot of people are saying, hey, it's your life. You need to figure yourself out and navigate the world.
Yep.
If there's an ad saying you should, use drugs or drink alcohol, you don't have to do those things.
No.
Which I guess is a fair point. But for me, it's more the annoyance of trying to enjoy my sporting event on TV.
Yeah, I hear you. I wanted to ask Bruce yesterday, and maybe you know the answer. There was a shift a couple of years ago where celebrity endorsements were concerned that they had to include a bit of a help component to the message.
They weren't
right?
allowed to advertise the product per se. They had to advertise responsible gambling, but they could still mention the product on there, right?
All right.
There's the Conor McDavid commercial with the guy in the Zamboni in his backyard.
That's
Yeah.
because everyone has a Zamboni in their backyard.
Anyways.
All right, let's get to tonight's
show.
Proud Canadians we are, and
Yeah.
we shop Canadian certainly when we can.
Is your grocery cart full of Canadian items?
I always try and support local, support the Maple Leaf. Absolutely.
Yep, I try to support local breweries. But you know what I have? I haven't bought a beer at a beer store in years. I really like to try to support. That's one way to support Made in Canada. But the Buy Canadian movement, we've talked about it on the show in the past. We've had different guests talk about it. And it has maintained itself. It wasn't like a real popular thing that then quickly died out. It's been consistent. Consumers still care very much about it. A year after Trump first brought in these tariffs, it got everybody so upset, and the threats of annexation and all his 51st state rhetoric. It stayed. And it stayed so much that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency put out a statement the other day saying that they acknowledge how much Canadians care about this, and they've really cracked down on misleading labels. And they want to make sure that if people are seeing a Made in Canada or a Product of Canada sign, or it's under the Maple Leaf, that they can trust that it's actually Canadian. And they announced that they've fined 5 grocery stores since last April for a total combined amount of $47,000. And they've actually investigated more than 100 other complaints and had some other remedies, whether it be, some change in their practices, but without the fines.
Right.
So it's an issue that they're taking seriously. That's what they wanted to get that point across. And, it did strike me at this whole idea of when you're trying to buy Canadian, you also have to watch out for the maple washing, that idea that people are taking advantage of their connections to Canada or alleged Canadian connections. So we're going to talk some more about – because the other angle, too, is some people saying, well, that's not a very high fine for a big grocery store. What's that going to do? But there's some serious reputational damage,
No
too.
question.
So we're going to talk all about that today. Who's our guest today?
Our guest today is Richard Leblanc. He is the professor of governance, law, and ethics at York University. At a time when more Canadians are trying to shop with intention, scanning shelves for Maple Leaf labels and choosing products they believe support the domestic economy, some of the country's biggest grocers are being fined for getting that label wrong. 2 Ontario stores owned by Loblaw were recently hit with fines for mislabeling products as Canadian. The dollar amount, relatively small, but the implications potentially much bigger, because this isn't just about a sticker on a shelf. It's about consumer trust, corporate accountability, and what happens when a marketing push collides with regulatory reality. Richard Leblanc is a professor of governance, law, and ethics at York University, and he's been watching how companies respond to exactly these kinds of risks. Richard joins us tonight from Toronto. Richard, welcome to Closer Look. It's great to have you.
My pleasure, Scott. Nice to be here.
Richard, you said this moment is unlike anything you've seen in terms of Canadians wanting to buy local. Are you surprised that the movement has been sustained for so long?
No, I think it is caused by the U.S. tariffs, and I think Canadians are exercising their pocketbook, and they're saying, "Listen, not all Canadians, but many Canadians are saying I want to support Canadian companies." And when it comes to groceries, which every Canadian has to buy, right? They want to be able to rely that on the labeling, product of Canada, made in Canada, even the use of the maple leaf. They want to be able to rely on that in an easy, seamless way to exercise and support Canadian companies. And if that label is incorrect, the effect is that the regulator is saying, listen, you need to get it right. And my point is, if the label is incorrect, Canadians are mistakenly enriching unjustly other companies that are not associated or produced or made in Canada. So the use of mislabeling opens up, reputation risk, financial risk, and you mentioned, Scott, $10,000. That's not a huge amount of money, but it's not insignificant if you're a small shop. It also introduces the potential for maple washing class action lawsuits. And there's one that was filed in Quebec recently. It's not approved by the court yet, but it alleges very similarly that Loblaws, Sobeys, Metro, and Walmart are mislabeling. So I think Canadians are seized with the importance of this, and they want to be able to support Canadian-owned companies and Canadian employees.
Well put. I want to get into some of the issues you just mentioned there, but I want to ask you personally, has it changed your shopping habits at all?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I shop online, and I look for the maple leaf, and I look for produced in Canada. So I think it's a small way of supporting Canada. And I think I don't think I'm atypical. I think there are many Canadians that do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. Richard, just for everyone's benefit, can you explain the difference between made in Canada and product of Canada?
The product of Canada is a much higher threshold. 98% of the total direct costs need to be Canadian, and that's processing, ingredients, and labor. So that's product of Canada. Made in Canada is a lower threshold. 51% of the total direct cost of production must be Canadian. And also a substantial transformation must have occurred in Canada. And you can use the maple leaf for either one, product of Canada or made in Canada. But the regulator goes a little further, Scott, and they talk about, roasted, distilled, canned, refined, processed, prepared. So the regulator has got very specific regulations on how Canadian a product has to be for a company to be able to benefit from that Canadian brand. It's sort of like a passport, right? The Canadian passport is one of the most respected in the world. The Canadian flag is similarly. So I think there's a market value attached to being a Canadian product. I think that's what the regulator is really saying.
That's a great explanation. Thanks so much for that. And just to bring our listeners up to speed, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency put out a statement the other day acknowledging that this is an important issue and that they're on this. They want to make sure that the labeling is accurate. And they did say there's been 5 fines since last April for a total of $47,000. Just some examples, Professor. What are they being? Do you know some specifics of what they're actually finding and why they're leveling a fine?
Yeah, there was, in one instance, there was inconsistency between the product was not mislabeled, but it was on a shelf and the signage on the shelf was inconsistent with the product. Mm-hmm. In another one, in the class action one I mentioned, there were, it is being alleged that onions from Egypt and Guatemala were represented as being Canadian. So it's not serious in the sense that it's ingredients, but where it can start costing real money is if this class action lawsuit is approved by the courts and it's Canada wide, because the average grocer has thousands and thousands of products, and lawyers are very good at asking for books and records This reminds me of the bread price fixing litigation from 3 or 4 years ago, where grocers can ultimately pay in the millions of dollars. So I think it's important to get it right. And my area is boards of directors, and boards often talk about legal risk, regulatory risk, reputation risk, and they cross-examine management teams and say, listen, what are the controls so that we're not offside? Because we don't want to be splashed across the news. And even when a company is splashed across the news, like Loblaws, for example, other peer companies will say in their boardrooms to management, show me that this will not happen to us. What are the procedures that are in place so that we get this right? So I think it's percolating across Canada. And that's all it takes, gentlemen, is a few fines for it to catch people's attention.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, Richard. The fines, 47 grand spread over 5 companies, doesn't seem like much. Should they be more?
They should be, because not all companies are the same size, and it might be a rounding error for a large grocer. It might be more significant for a small shop or a mom and pop shop. I think this reminds me of FinTrack when FinTrack were the financial crime agency in Ottawa were giving very low fines, and the legislation was changed, and now they're giving fines in the hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars. I think legislation needs to be changed to enable the regulator to impose larger fines, commensurate with fault and commensurate with the size of the grocer.
But as you mentioned too, the other important thing is it's not really just about the fine amount either. It's about the fact that your company name is in the headlines, and the reputational damage. That's pretty significant too, right?
That's as if not more significant. Yes, absolutely.
That's a great point. The other issue is it's not just the fines either. We're seeing that the CFIA has announced that they've had at least they've investigated about 100 or so complaints, 104 complaints, and they've done some other things as well. This might be a difficult question, but are you surprised that they're paying this much attention to it, or is this what they need to be doing?
Food is very important. It's not just labeling; it's also ingredients and language and the metric system, and it's health and safety. So I'm not surprised that the food regulator is seized with this, and I think, as I said, it's so widespread that every Canadian has to buy food in one way, shape, or form. So I think the regulator this is not going away, and I think there's going to, and in fact, gentlemen, I predict that there's going to be more fines. So I think it's incumbent on companies to. You could even use, if you're clever, you could probably use artificial intelligence and blockchain to associate from the so-called from farm to field to plate, so that you actually get it right. So that by the time you get the package, if you're a retailer, by the time you get the manufactured package, you're comfortable, you're confident that we have gotten this right. And I'm also starting to see contracts with third parties, manufacturers and designers, et cetera, to get this right, so that everybody in the supply chain, there's no weak link in the supply chain, so that Canadians can be comfortable when you go into a grocer or when you shop online, you can grab an item, and it shouldn't take you a long search. You should grab an item and it should be right there, and you should be able to rely on that. You shouldn't be taxed with uncertainty. It should be clear, it should be accessible, and it should be seamless.
Richard, is the Buy Canadian movement having a real impact, or is it really just a feel-good thing?
No, I think it is having an impact. When you look at the surveys of the number of Canadians that are going south of the border, that are spending their money in Canada, and you look at tourism, and all that affects jobs. You look at even attractions like Las Vegas, and even you look at laws like federal, provincial, and municipal laws have all changed now to compel companies. If there is a Canadian supplier in first instance, and I'm generalizing, but these are what the laws are saying. If there is a Canadian company in first instance, you need to buy Canadian. And so I think politicians are seized with this. I think regulators are seized, and I think Canadians are. And I think it's a mixed blessing with Mr. Trump. This actually has got the perhaps unintended effect of strengthening our resiliency, our resolve, and our solidarity. So I do think, Scott, that there is a direct relationship between buying Canadian and strengthening our capacity to feed ourselves and to buy Canadian. We're not a large country, so we're competing. And when you bring up dairy, for example, we have very different regulations and safety and health, and we don't have long production lines like the American food companies. So it's in Canada's interest to start to develop this critical mass so that we can be self-reliant when it comes to food.
Do you think it's enough that President Trump has actually noticed?
He was noticed?
No, do you think it's been enough of a movement that President Trump has noticed?
Yeah, I think he watches television and he sees Carney doing trade deals. I think there's been over a dozen deals in the last number of months. He's at any given day. I think he's in Ottawa this week, but he had deals with India. He's been to China. He's been to Indonesia. He's been to the Nordic countries. And I think Canadian businesses should be following suit so that we can begin to diversify our trade. A worst case scenario, gentlemen, is that we right now we're sort of living in a bit of a bubble because 85% of our goods are tariff free. They're CUSMA. And if Trump can very easily, and he's already mused about this, he can very easily walk CUSMA back, Canadian, U.S., Mexico free trade agreement, and impose a tariff like other countries of 10, 20, 30%. So I'm telling my boards that I work with, listen, chances are you've got CUSMA, you're under the CUSMA umbrella, but in the next 6 months, your management team should be bringing to you plans if there is a walk back from CUSMA and if there are tariffs imposed on what were formerly tariff-free goods. So we're not out of the woods yet. We have to negotiate CUSMA, and I think the Canadian public is really giving Carney a long leash because they realize that Mr. Trump is erratic and unpredictable at the best of times. But in a worst case scenario, our tariff beyond the sectoral tariffs, our tariffs might be getting worse sooner than better. Sooner than later.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. I appreciate it. What's the best case scenario for us, they say, a year from now then, Professor? I mean, is it to try to drag this out as far as the long as we can, these negotiations?
Yeah, I think and I can't speak for the Canadian politicians, but I think the strategy is to wait this out and to hope that the midterms turn around the Senate and the House. And we just had a seat overnight that flipped to Democrats. So I think, but there is a bit of a clock for Canada. I think midsummer, June or July, all three countries have to indicate what they wish, if they wish CUSMA to continue or not. And there are things that follow. So we can't indefinitely wait out the clock. But we should be prepared for all scenarios. And, I just mentioned the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that we renew CUSMA in a way that gives Trump a win and gives, obviously, Canada a win. And I think Carney is clever enough and the people around him that they're not going to have a bad deal. So I think, a best case scenario is we get an acceptable deal for another 5-10 years so that we can continue our trading relationship with the United States. But at the same time, I think and these are not my words, these are Carney's words, I think the relationship between Canada and the U.S., the former relationship is over. And I think Canadians and regulators and provinces and territories have all come to realize that we can't have 85% of our trade with one country. And we never had. I mean, this started, you remember in 1989 with Brian Mulroney and John Turner, the free trade agreement that started. I mean, over the last 35 years, we've been progressively intertwined with the United States. So I think we have to really de-risk from that and become a little more resilient and have trade agreements with other countries.
That's a great point. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Professor. I do have one more question for me. You are a professor of governance, law, and ethics, and obviously a very smart guy. Ethics, I just think, Professor, has it ever been crazier the way the world has changed so much to be an ethics professor and thinking about ethical dilemmas we're facing as a world? You ever ever had to put more thought than you do now?
I try not to use Trump in my classes repetitively, there's no shortage. It's on an hourly basis, right? So you read the news, and I tell my students, right, like don't read my textbook, read the newspapers, and come to class and talk about ethical dilemmas. And I said, okay, so what's our ethical dilemma for today? And all the hands go up. So yes, it's a good time for comedians, and it's a good time for professors.
Great stuff. On that note, Professor, before we let you go tonight, any final words?
Well, I'm glad that the story is being pursued. I think it's important, and I think it's the thin edge of the wedge when it comes to CUSMA negotiations. But I think the stronger that we band together and support Canadian companies and Canadian workers, I think that nothing bad can come from that.
Good stuff. From Toronto tonight, there's Richard Leblanc, Professor of Governance, Law, and Ethics at York University. Professor, appreciate your time. Good to see you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day. Bye now.
Imagine being an ethics professor today. You wouldn't need a textbook.
No, I couldn't even imagine, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think, he might argue, but I think we've reached the end of ethics. There's no more ethics anymore.
None.
No,
out the window.
Ethical frameworks are out the window. But it's interesting because you think of it, he said he advises a lot of boards and talks about these. And it is, reputational damage is so important, right? And your reputation is everything if you run a business, right? So people are all up in arms about, $10,000 fine. That's nothing. That's peanuts for these guys. Yeah, it is. But their name on the cover of the newspaper or on closer look, I mean, that's you can't recover from that.
Priceless.
You can't recover from that. So
Cannot put a price on it.
Great conversation. I was glad that we got to meet Richard and that our listeners and viewers got to meet Richard. I asked him if we can keep him on our Rolodex, and so I'm sure we'll have him back for some other ethical discussions down the road.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for us this evening. Closer look at villagemedia.ca. That's our email address. Reach out anytime. And, of course, you can sign up to receive episodes straight to your inbox free of charge. Closerlookpodcast.ca. For Zach Trunzo, executive producer of this evening's program, and Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for joining us. Oh, don't forget, Dan Schulman, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, prior to the start of the baseball season.
Let's go.
To that.
Let's go.
Go Jays. See you tomorrow night, right here on Closer Look.